Thank you so much today for joining us. I also want to let folks know that AI tools are not allowed in this meeting. Apologies for any inconvenience, but just a reminder. But I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So thank you for joining us today for Building Resilient Minds, Trauma-Informed Care, and Brain Development. My name is Jordan Greenwald. I'm the Training and Community Engagement Manager at HCET, and I will be moderating the webinar today. I'd like to briefly introduce you to HCET. If you are unfamiliar with us, our mission is to provide comprehensive program development, education, and training to improve reproductive and sexual health outcomes. We are an organization of passionate people who are proactive in our belief that access to evidence-based, medically accurate reproductive and sexual health education, training, and care is a fundamental right. This webinar does have closed captions available, so to enable them on your screen, you'll just click Show Captions at the bottom of your screen, and you can also change the settings if needed. To submit a question, you will actually use the chat feature. I apologize, the Q&A feature is not enabled for this meeting today. So please just feel free to send your questions at any time through the chat. I will make sure that none of them get missed, and we will do Q&A at the end. If you would like your question to be sent more anonymously, you can send it privately to just me, and I will share your question. And like I said, we'll hold all questions till the end. Please be sure to follow us on our various social media accounts to keep up to date with the newest information and events. A link to complete an event evaluation will be put in the chat at the end of the webinar, as well as via email. Please complete this as it helps inform future presentations. It should take less than 5 minutes to fill out. Archived presentations and a list of upcoming events can be viewed on our website, hcet.org. And if you experience any technical difficulties during this presentation, you can send a message to me via the chat, or you can contact updates@hcet.org. And now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for today. Nancy Michael is the Director of Education and Co-Director for the Neuroscience and Behavior major in the College of Science at the University of Notre Dame. She received her bachelor's degree in biomedical science from Western Michigan University in 2001. After many years in the workforce, she returned to graduate study in 2008 and earned a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Minnesota in 2012. Professor Michael uses her disciplinary expertise to develop and implement near-science approaches, near meaning neuroscience, epigenetics, adverse childhood experiences, and resilience. These aim to mitigate the impact of toxic stress on individuals and communities. Her research employs a community-centered collective impact model to collaborate with organizations in developing near-based strategies tailored to specific populations. And without further ado, I will be turning things over to Dr. Michael.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you guys so much for the opportunity. Yeah, so my name is Nancy. Neuroscientist by training. In life, I'm a mom and a wife and a community member. And one of the coolest things I think about the education that I've had is that it seems to be relevant to anybody walking around with a nervous system inside of them. So generally, all humans that we encounter have a nervous system, have a brain that's on board. And so my job here today is just to kind of unpack some of the stuff that we all share in common, and with a specific eye towards kind of exploring brain development a little bit, but then kind of asking the question of what on earth that might have to do with trauma-informed care. So this is one of my favorite slides. This is from the ACE Interface Coalition. And it's just beautiful. The memory of our experiences is stored in our body. Really, really demonstrating that like from the moments of birth, everything about our environment inside and outside of ourselves really contributes to our memory and our construction of our perceptions of self. A lot about the human nervous system is born remarkably immature. So neurobiologically, so nervous system, biologically, the biology of the nervous system. Babies are floppy. They can't talk. They're not walking around. Um, and that's just kind of the evidence then that there's a whole lot of brain and nervous system development that must take place for this like gain of function that we see over the first many years. And so first question is how often have you thought about how you became you, right? Much like the nervous system is born immature, this is just a really easy picture, right? And if we think about neuroscience and brain science, it can feel really complicated. But this is basically what's happening in the first many years of life. A lot of the brain cells that we have, a lot of those neurons grow from being like little seed or seedling neurons. They start to sprout and grow these different branches. And then through our experiences, right? Those experiences, how rich the soil is, how much sunlight, how much water, what are the nutrients, kind of directs how robust these branches grow, um, the directionality, do they thrive, those kinds of things. And so to the best of the estimates, about 80% of human brain structure is derived through kind of genetics, right? So like within human genetics, it's just like following a recipe to bake a cake. It's like you have you have these basic ingredients, and if you follow these basic ingredients, you're going to end up with something like a cake. But my kiddos like really buttery vanilla cake. And so while the recipe might call for a teaspoon of vanilla, they're going to add like 2 tablespoons of this super concentrated butter vanilla stuff. Right. And so we can think about that as how experience then, right? Genetics offers this kind of basic playbook and the recipe for what's building the human nervous system, but how robust? So getting the seeds there in the right places, but how deep these roots go, how big the branches get. There's a phrase called everybody write this down. Experience dependent plasticity, right? So about 20% of the uniqueness of neural architecture derives and emerges from this experience dependent plasticity. All right. So, things we know about the brain. If you are by yourself, write some things that you've heard about the brain. If you are with it, I see um, Joey Tingley's camera is on and they're eating lunch. So you guys talk to each other. What do you guys know? What have you heard about the brain? Just some brain basics, right? Nothing crazy. We'll take 30 seconds, write some stuff down. What have you heard about the brain? Put them in the chat. Maybe Jordan, you can read some stuff if anything shows up in the chat.
Absolutely, yeah. Adele says gray and white matter.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else said continuously developing, billions of neurons.
Awesome. Wonderful. Yeah. So everybody's got some kind of brain basics, right? So we're just going to talk about those brain basics. Gray and white matter. Gray matter is the name of the stuff that we give to like cells. So this wrinkly outside part is called cortex. That's the gray matter of the brain. It's largely just cellular material. Um, White matter are these like basically you can think about them as like long ropes or cords of communication. So that while we can separate different structures, right? So all this wrinkly spaghetti stuff on the outside is cortex. Cortex can be separated by function into these different lobes that maybe some of you have had experience with. The frontal lobe as the house of like thinking, executive function, planning, attention. The parietal lobe is like this associative sensation perception kinds of things. Occipital lobe vision, cerebellum balance, temporal lobe language and emotion, right? They're different. The repeating theme of nervous system architecture and development are these structure function relationships. So while the frontal lobe also gets way disproportionate attention. We have a whole nervous system that's contributing to our function, not just this teeny little thinking part. But right, it is an important part. And so the gray matter is that wrinkly stuff. And then the white matter is all of the things that live kind of like on the inside, deeper inside of the brain. You can think about them like cords or cords of communication, right? The cord that connects the electricity to the computer, right? That information energy flows through those cords. And those are like those white matter tracks. They allow these different structures that house particular functions to communicate, collaborate, and coordinate function across the entirety of the nervous system. Structure function relationships also exist at the level of cells. So this is like a cartoon of a brain cell. So many billions of neurons was one of the comments in the chat. So this is a cartoon of one neuron. And generally speaking, this part here, these are called the dendrites. They're like the big branches on the tree. They're the receiving end. So like the branches on the tree, and then the leaves grow, and those leaves receive sunlight. These branches on the neurons grow. They receive information from other neurons that are communicating with them. Um, one one axon, so lots and lots and lots of dendrites. One axon, just like there's one trunk on a tree. And much like the root systems of trees kind of branch and go in all of these places that we never ever see below the ground. We know they're there. We know they're pretty complex. Axons also, there might be one axon, but this one axon can then runs through those white matter tracks, those white matter cords of communication, extends this trunk-like projection into those cords of communication, and then can like split off and leave the white matter tract to communicate with all of these other regions of different structures to moderate their function. So structure function relationships are super, super important. And in this experience dependent plasticity, right, that genetics gets us to something that looks like a brain. And then our experiences direct exactly how these branches grow, right? So this is an actual, we looked at a cartoon of a neuron. Here's an actual picture of a cortical neuron. So here's that cell body. All of these guys. So you can see it's way more robust and way more branchy than the cartoon is. But all of these, and then they have these little like bump points. Every single one of those is like from the leaves perspective, every single one of those is an entry point to receive information from the surrounding world. Structure function relationships. Neurons, just like people, come in all different shapes and sizes, and the neuron's job, right, its structure determines its function. So some neurons have these amazing big giant branches, right? Like here we have A and E, right? These guys' jobs structurally support bringing in and listening to lots and lots of information. Neuron B, neuron D, those neurons, they don't want to listen. Their job is to like take a piece of information from one place and get it to another place super, super fast. So if you can imagine, if you're walking along and you step on something really, really sharp, let's say you're walking barefoot because it was like 75 degrees yesterday, at least up where I live. You're walking around barefoot and you step on something really sharp. You don't want, right? These guys, you don't want them on board. You don't want to be thinking about the quality of the pain. And is it right? Is it sharp or is it dull or is it pain, right? Is my foot on fire? You don't want to do that problem solving thing. You want these guys to take control and get your foot out of there as fast as possible. And then you can kind of problem solve, right? So structure, function. Sometimes we need rapid communication. Sometimes we need really complex computation. And where so much of the plasticity, the changeable nature of the brain takes place then are on these dendrites, on these branch points, but also in these teeny, teeny, tiny little sucker-like or mushroom-like structures. These are called dendritic spines. And to the best of our understanding, these are the actual physical structures of learning and memory. So if you remember anything tomorrow that you didn't know today, it's because you have actually like physically new structures in your brain across that neural network that support the maintenance and recall of that information. And that is super, super cool because through those very, very tiny, like more than microscopic little structures, right? The gray matter in particular regions that have a certain structure and function, right? They send their axons to other regions that have a particular structure and function. But it's this micro connectivity, right? This experience-dependent plasticity stuff that allows for the emergence of not only like how robust a particular region might be able to compute, but also how well integrated then, how well in communication different regions of the brain are with other parts, right? So to be able to like feel an emotion, recognize that emotion, and inhibit a particular behavioral response requires communication across many different parts of the nervous system as a whole. So it's constantly, it's obligated to be integrated in its function, right? We're structure function relationships through which emerge our capacity. How are we doing? Questions so far? This is just for a moment of wonder. We showed a cartoon. We started with a cartoon. This is a picture that I took a long time ago. There are crazy, crazy, crazy cool ways of taking pictures of brain cells these days. So this cell is from human cortex. It is a single neuron, single neuron. This is a single neuron with 5,600 nerve fibers. So those axons that are coming in. So the neural cell itself, here's the cell body. Here are these dendrites in gray that we talked about. The blue lines, these nerve fibers, those are those branches of axons that are coming in from other places that are in communication with this one cell. So these green pieces, right, are the kind of these receiving communication points, these dendritic spines. So that means one cell in the human cortex, this one cell is capable of listening to input from over 5,000 other brain cells that are coming in from all of these different rates, maybe some locally, maybe some from long distances. But the computational capacity and the specificity then of any given cell lands in this experience-dependent realm of plasticity. Genetics gets the cells to the places that they need to be. Experiences drive how and where specific points of communication emerges. So overall, right, our behaviors, who we are, how we show up in the world, emerges not because we have 186 billion neurons and 86 billion glial cells like just thrown into a bucket, but it has to do with this very particular organization, right? That genetics has played out well enough to get us to something that looks like a human brain. And then the specificity and the uniqueness of Nancy compared to Jordan, compared to Cynthia, compared to Hannah, right? That has to do, all of us start with these seedlings, right? And the ways in which the environment we exchange with the environment exchanges with us, drives the specificity then of the growth of gray matter, the directionality to land us, right? One cell ends up with, computer got unplugged for a second. One cell, 5,000 synapses, 5,000 points of communication. Over the entirety of the brain, we have over 100 trillion points of communication across the neural network, right? So the computational capacity is incredible. And it is this complexity that makes you, right? That makes me, that gives every human being, despite the fact that our genetics are identical, right? Virtually identical, right? It's this complexity and this specificity of experience dependency that gives us the uniqueness of our individual selves. So quite literally, the memory of our experiences through all of these exchanges, this experience-dependent plasticity over time, literally stores our experiences constructed as part of self. And we are built from the bottom up. What does that mean? So in Western cultures, we spend a tremendous amount of time focusing on this gray matter stuff, this wrinkly outside stuff. But that, right? Babies are floppy. That's my daughter when she was first born. She's 14 now. She's so awesome. I have two daughters. They're both super awesome. But as everybody knows, we get lots of pictures of the first kid and virtually none of any ones that come afterwards. All right. So babies are floppy, right? They're not up, they're not talking, they're not moving around, right? This wrinkly gray matter stuff is not very well developed at the time. It's there, it's waiting, it's expectant. But the stuff that is solidly built, we're built from the bottom up, is this survival stuff, the stuff of respiration, the stuff of heart rate, the stuff of blood pressure, the stuff of being able to like eat and swallow. That's very, very well in place. Nothing else is. So this is my daughter's first bath. We're built from the bottom up. She could stay in this state in the presence, but man, when we perturb her environment, she lost it. And the expectancy of that young nervous system does not have the capacity to kind of reinstate a sense of calm on its own. This little nervous system looks to and is expectant of the world around it, and particularly caregivers, right? That the little nervous system does not have the cognitive capacity to understand I'm hungry, therefore I need food. Let me go find food. The neurobiological kind of obligation of this tiny nervous system is, oh my gosh, something inside of me is perturbed. That is a threat. They don't even think that's right. Like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. Something is perturbed. It is through the embrace and the safety and the nervous system construction of a bigger nervous system that allows this young nervous system to start to build its own sense of regulation, its own sense of like, this interoceptive state makes me feel this way. My caregiver comes and does X and makes me feel Y. Over time, the way those behaviors are paired with this internal construction, right? That we're bringing in information through our senses and have this like upward drive into emotional and thinking circuits. And then eventually we get this bounce right from the bottom up and down. So we are built very, very much from the bottom up. So again, in the chat, what systems are online on birth? I gave you some already. So let's see how well you're listening. What systems are online at birth in terms of like what can a baby do? What's a baby able to do? Go ahead and put them in the chat. And Jordan, if you could just read them off as they start to come in.
Heart rate, cry, breathe. Someone said, you said respiration, but sucking reflex should also be on. Someone also said sucking, feel hunger, eliminate, root
Yeah,
and
eliminate. Uh-huh. Absolutely. Yeah. So those are great, right? We've got all this respiratory, heart rate, blood pressure, diaphragm. So digestive, stomach, intestines, bladder, suckle, breathe, swallow for eating, right? This is very much about peripheral nervous system connectivity with, right? Not so much voluntary. We have reflexive movements, but we're not up and walking around. But this autonomic gastrointestinal stuff. So we talk about the nervous system. We spend a lot of time here thinking about the brain, and most of our time thinking about this thinking part of the brain. But when I say we're built from the bottom up, what I'm trying to communicate is that the stuff that's fully online at birth is this brainstem, spinal cord, peripheral gut stuff, and sensory perception. And it's this early activity then that starts to form in an experience dependent kind of way. These seedlings are in place in the big brain parts, but the ways in which our environment drives the sensory up sculpts the specifics then of how does this body sensation communicate to my emotional systems? How does this body sensation communicate to my sense of safety, my sense of belonging, my ability to feel safe in the presence of others, so that when I learn to speak, I can tell them what is happening on my inside. right? So from this perspective, this idea of kind of warm, the young nervous systems are obligated to look to bigger nervous systems for survival. And young nervous systems, again, they're not thinking about survival as like basic need kinds of things. They're not thinking, they're not going through their checklist of like, oh, am I sheltered? Oh, do I have water? Oh, am I fed? Where do I get my meal from? This young nervous system is like, something is amiss. Oh, bigger nervous system. With the expectation then that bigger nervous system provides this incredibly responsive care to go through the troubleshooting. Anybody that's a caregiver, right? You go through the troubleshooting of like, oh, are you are you wet? Nope. Diaper's dry. Are you, are you bored? Are you hungry? Um, to help then solve the problem and reinstate that sense of calm inside of kiddo. So warm, consistent care, right? Social safety or neurobiological, the nervous system's ability to construct a internal sense of safety on the inside is a foundational expectation of the nervous system. It's a foundational expectation for our survival that we as human beings are able and expect to and are able to construct an internal sense of safety via the world around us. But not everybody's environment is the same, right? We all have very unique experiences that then drive the specific points of communication. So if we think, we're going to pause here, and we're going to think about we're going to pause here and think about, right? Remember that picture of the brain. Remember that picture of the brain. Remember that spinal cord. Maybe I'm going to go back. Hold on. Here we go. We got this picture of the brain. We got this picture of the spinal cord. This then makes up our central nervous system, right? Brain and spinal cord. Our peripheral nervous system are the aspects of the nervous system that not only do this voluntary muscle movement stuff, but also do the autonomic tone. Autonomic is kind of like automatic. And this autonomic branch is divided into two components. How many people, raise your Zoom hands. How many people have heard of sympathetic tone, right? This is our fight or flight response. Any Zoom hands? Zoom hands? Okay, I got a couple of Zoom hands. Thanks, guys. Uh, Sympathetic tone, that's our fight or flight response. Parasympathetic tone, we don't talk about as much. Parasympathetic tone also has a fun, catchy rhyming name called rest and digest. Okay, so rest and digest, fight or flight, rest and digest. It makes it sound like they're diametrically opposed, but it turns out for healthy function, they're both online all of the time. Ready? So if we want to do a little quick activity and we do this, ready? Everybody relax, shake out your shoulders a little bit and take a deep breath in. And now exhale. Do it again. Exhale. So every time we breathe in, we get a little bump of sympathetic tone. Every time we exhale, we get a little bump of parasympathetic tone. So all of the clinicians that are on the call, right, probably know far more than I do about the different ways that we can play with breath to activate or calm down or start to introduce regulation into a system that's just out of whack. Okay? So being built from the bottom up means that through these caregiving interactions, all this sensory stuff from the outside stops here in the spinal cord first, gives our autonomic nervous system some kind of information with which to regulate our internal sense, as well as the sensory information is also providing information to pass up to these higher order brain systems. So when we put this in the context then of social safety or neurobiological safety, it's the nervous system's ability to construct this balance in autonomic tone such that both the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of that autonomic nervous system are working together for optimal physiological function. That's a lot of words. Let's say it one more time. The body's ability nervous system's ability to construct social safety or right, that emerges from neurobiology, that emerges from the very specific structures and functions of the central and peripheral nervous system. And it's built or constructed in a way that is moderated then by how we have experienced the world. Does our nervous system have the ability, right? The ideal model would have the autonomic nervous system, both the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches, working in coordinated balance with each other, such that sometimes throughout our day, right? Human life has never been all easy. There's always been challenges. There's always stressors, such that throughout our day, we can dive into this sympathetic tone and reinstate coordinated balance. In situations of extreme trauma, we can dive way too far into parasympathetic tone where we just completely shut down and dissociate, right? Does the nervous system have the ability, the flexibility across all of these systems to be able to reinstate autonomic balance after an episode or an experience that dips us into one place or the other? Okay. The synapses then, these points of communication, right? These 100 trillion synapses, points of communication that are unique, the specificity of which is unique to all of the people because of all of our different experiences over the course of our lifetimes. The synapses of sensory systems are developed through then, right? Think about that little like floppy baby, right? What about that infant's experience is like rich in auditory information? What languages are being spoken at home? How often? What's the depth? What's the complexity? What's the proximity of baby to those conversations, right? From visual input, man, oh man, in 2025, are these little kiddos' visual inputs impoverished and also hyper stimulated all at the same time? Because instead of this rich outside world that's got depth and dimension and color and all this stuff, right? We're spending increasingly more time inside on tiny, tiny screens that also have this really, really rapid pace of scene change. Olfactory stimulate, what kinds of smells are present in your home? What kinds of smells are present in your neighborhood? Gustatory taste, what is the flavor profile of things that you're doing? So each of these sensory modalities has a very specific circuit. We take this information in from the outside world, so auditory, visual, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile. Those are all outside world senses that help us understand our inside world, our vestibular sense, the ways in which our body figures out balance when we move, proprioception, how is it? Have you ever thought about how is it that your body develops its own sense of where it lives in space and how it's navigating, right? This idea of proprioception and interoception, very, very much derived from the peripheral nervous system. What is happening in my body? Am I feeling sleepy? Am I feeling hungry? Am I feeling thirsty? All of these, that interoceptive sense then is an aspect of function of the peripheral nervous system. But the specific synapses then are dependent upon the depth, richness, duration of our exposure to one or a variety of different sensations. So we're going to go into some circuitry. Don't worry. All I want you to do is count. Okay. Again, we like to think of ourselves as really thinking beings, but we're not. So when we think about, so this is for touch. The first stop of touch is not a thinking part of the brain. The first stop of touch is in the spinal cord. The second stop of touch can be in the brainstem. The third stop is in a part of the brain called the thalamus. And the fourth stop is in this like conscious perception area. But that means that anything we touch has 1, 2, 3 opportunities to be computed and understood in a way by our bodies that is completely outside of conscious perception. Isn't that so cool? So no wonder every single human being walking around has the capacity to have a different perception of exactly the same external stimulus. And we can do this for every single sensory system we have. We won't, don't worry, we only have like an hour. But it's possible if you ever feel like doing it on your own, right? So the take home really is the first stop cortex? Is the first stop of any sensory experience this wrinkly spaghetti part? No, it's not. There's so much processing that happens in the central nervous system before information ever reaches cortex. Okay. So we're built from the bottom up and we become both top down and bottom up over time. Right. So from this perspective, kind of transitioning then, so these are our brain basics. And from this perspective, we can consider then, why are ACEs a thing? If warm, consistent care, right, is the conduit to all of these basic needs of survival, why is it that when we violate that expectation, why can that become harmful? Okay. So here's the expectation. Here is meeting the expectation. It would be completely expected that every human being has experiences that push their system out of this autonomic balance. That is a guarantee, and it will always be a guarantee. But another part of the expectation is that when that happens, particularly in these earlier stages of development over the first 2 decades of life, when that happens, there is a bigger nervous system that is available and accessible to that younger nervous system that is perturbed to set the kind of neurobiological example of like what it feels like to reinstate calm. That is the expectation. So I've had lots and lots and lots of conversations over the years. Right. So the Andon Folletti study was really, really seminal because for the first time in the medical community, there was this giant body of evidence that was like, oh, it turns out what happens to you does matter in a very real and medical way. Those two guys were particularly interested in prevention. So the 10 things that were on that list are all things that could be largely preventable. It does not mean that those are the only 10 things that cause stress to a developing system, right? Those 10 things are not the only 10 things that cause adversity. There are lots of things that can, right, think about that can put pressure on a system and push it out of this autonomic balance, okay? Here's the expectation. So type, timing, and duration of whatever this pressure is all become moderators then of balanced nervous system function. So if we want to think about it from that perspective, then maybe we can consider like let's expand our thinking away from those 10 line items on that survey to think about ACEs as a cumulative impact of the distance between expectation and experience, where this would be the expectation. And we all come to the table with very different experiences. And there's so much variability in what those are. And these young systems are developing, right? What is the sensory experience? What is the adaptation and the very specific connectivity, right? That those 100 trillion synapses that are being built all along these different neural circuits. Type, timing, and duration of whatever this distance might be all become moderators then of developmental outcomes. So ACEs very broadly, right? Like what are we doing? What's the experiences? And I think importantly, it's not only about what experiences we have had or are having that are putting pressure on a system, but if we're spending much of our developmental time apprehensive, afraid, right? Not able to develop the sensory experiences that would drive a sense of connection, right? It's not just about the experiences that we have had, but it's very much about the experiences that we might not have had. All become moderators then of the specifics of the architecture and function of the nervous system. Okay. So I'm sure many people are familiar with the ACEs study. But a big question then is, right, like the vast majority of us come to the table with something. So how do we repair? Right? Awareness is a critical first step, but if all of this information doesn't land us in a place that we can actually like pivot a disposition and a habit of character or behavior to like do and be differently, right? We don't gain as much ground um, as maybe our kids and communities and maybe ourselves deserve. So the question again, take 30 seconds to a minute. What has been helpful for you? Right? In considering the ways in which, right, no matter how old we get, turns out we all still need to like rely on people around us sometimes. So thinking about that, thinking about over the experiences of your life, what has been helpful? Moments that you have felt seen, moments that you have experienced a reinstatement of autonomic balance because of actions and behaviors of another person.
Someone said predictability helps us know how to respond. Adele says petting dogs and cats.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Relying on stable people in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And predictability is a giant one. Ultimately, the brain can, it's only is able to make predictions. And so if the experiences, again, have consolidated that people are unreliable because or they're predictable because no one ever shows up, right? Then my prediction becomes people are unreliable. They're never going to show up versus an individual whose brain is developed in a world where like people said they were going to show up and they showed up and they were loving and they held you accountable and they had high expectations and they helped you along the way, like, right. That though the functions that emerge are really, really different, even though the structures are all the same, right? It's the computational capacity. So what's been helpful for you? And what have you witnessed that's helpful for others? Like, what have you seen and you're like, wow, that's cool. That's powerful.
Empathy, parents using calm voices and validating feelings, coloring in art, human touch, knowing there is someone, even if only one person, that they can count on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, right? And so again, it's these behaviors, right? Sometimes, often not just words, but what are the behaviors that let one human know that, let me start over. The behaviors that let one human let another human know that like like, we got you, man. You're not in this alone. Like, yeah, it's really hard, and so, but together we will get through it. So are built from the bottom up, and we become both bottom up and top down over the course of development. And so from transitioning to trauma-informed care, while these early bonds kind of shape the predictions, right? The neurobiological architecture and predictions underlying social connectivity and kind of expectation of the world around us, we as humans, because we become top down as well, and because we can do cool things like art and yoga and imagery and reflection, right? We have the ability to repair via these top down and whole body experiences to repair and integrate, right? We maintain this plastic capacity over our entire lifetimes. So we have the ability to repair from repair ourselves through kind of persistence and commitment. And right, and what the process is actually just building the architecture that our nervous system needs, right? If we grew up in a space where we're just kind of sympathetically dominated, right, this process of repair is actually building the architecture that is needed to help us reinstate a sense of calm or a sense of safety within ourselves. And that human nervous system maintains that plastic capacity over a lifetime, right? But we are in fact building, like we're actively repairing. It requires construction across, not just in this thinking part, but across the networks of the nervous system. Okay? So we start here, perhaps with an idea or with a desire to like be curious of self. We have to bring that curiosity into our from our thinking brain into our emotional brain, into our interoception, into the way that we consider, like, can we start to develop the ability to notice how we feel? And if we notice how we feel, can we allow that information to come back up to consider, this is how we're feeling, right? This is my sense in my stomach is super tight. I'm feeling nervous right now. And then ask a curiosity question of like, why might I be feeling nervous right now? Because it's only through that integration of all of these different systems and circuits that we can change behavior. So resilience emerges not from complete and utter protection from hardship, and certainly not from just beating up on kids because kids are resilient and they're not going to remember anything anyway. Resilience emerges from this integration of function, right? From experiencing both hardship and, right, but coupled with these positive experiences with compassionate accountability and love, right? It's not something we just get with time, but it's a capacity of our nervous system that's constructed within nervous system function to such an extent that it's the preferred computational option when we're just kind of walking around and hanging out over the course of a day. For all of us that come to the table with some nonsense, when we have the ability to repair and integrate, we actually get a gain of function. We can actually tolerate more stress, more hardship. We can be more productive under the same levels of stress as maybe some of our colleagues and friends, right? We gain function across the board. Okay. But resilience emerges from a combination, not just one or the other, but both in relationship to increase the flexibility of computation across the nervous system. What on earth? Trauma-informed care, man. Trauma-informed care is it's an organizational way of thinking about, right? Trying to operationalize all of this stuff. So from an organizational standpoint, we can think about how do we, through our built space, through our policy, through our interactions, through our body language, how do we express neurobiological safety organizationally? So these are the stages of trauma-informed care, right? A lot of places, right? Trauma, again, awareness is key. Awareness is critical because if we don't know that there's something that needs to be done, then, or something that might be improved upon or whatever it is, then how do we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Next stage, trauma sensitive, trauma responsive, and trauma informed. So there are lots of different components, right? So these are the 6 principles of trauma informed care. And relating to what we've talked about today, we're going to focus on the idea of safety, right? When we think about safety, I don't like that there's a house here. This is from Trauma Informed Oregon. I don't like there's a house. Built space is critically important. But our conversations want us to really be thinking about neurobiological safety. Neurobiological safety is a critical component. We can have built space safety and still feel really uneasy, right? So these strategies, trustworthiness, transparency, peer support, collaboration, mutuality, partner voice choice, cultural, historical, gender issues, right? That these become these behavioral kinds of strategies to be like, oh, wow, you look really uncomfortable. Like I got the built space, check that box. But man, you still seem maybe really uncomfortable. How do I demonstrate trustworthiness? I can't make you trust me. But I have to be reliable. I have to be open. I have to listen. I have to have patience. I have to have, expectations, accountability, right? Like how do I demonstrate trustworthiness? How do we work together so that we can collaborate towards a solution? How do we rely on each other? Oh my goodness gracious. How many people work in a workspace these days that you might not feel like you have good peer support either at work or at home or in the community, right? So many of us, we're doing all the things, but our network, we never outgrow this interdependent thing, right? We start dependent. We have a fallacy that we grow up to be independent, but our nervous systems remain neurobiologically obligated to look outside of ourselves to construct our internal sense of neurobiological safety. It is the foundational component for all of the things that could potentially follow. And if we don't have the individual ability to do so, or if when we change state, like if we go from one context at home where we feel pretty safe to a context at work where we don't feel pretty safe, right? How does an organization adapt so that they can demonstrate behaviors that can implement and support strategies? So there's the website link for these resources. There's many, 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 right? There, it can become overwhelming. In this particular context, it can, the invitation is to don't worry about all that stuff, right? You know yourself, or we have an opportunity to know ourselves. And we have an opportunity to become curious about how our construction informs what we bring to someone else, right? So everybody's internal sense of safety is constructed through bottom up and top down processing. And we can ultimately only influence ourselves, right? We can only influence what we bring to the table. And I know many of us, myself included, it's sometimes really hard to even be aware of what we're bringing to the table, right? I definitely think sometimes with my kids, right? They're like, I come home and I might be all huffy and whatever. And they're like, Mom, are you okay? I'm fine. Really? Because I'm probably not. I'm not paying attention to myself enough to know that I just need to take a minute just to like recalibrate so I can show up differently. Lots of information. Trauma, we'll go through it just super quick, right? So trauma aware, something like this, just information, awareness raising. Trauma sensitive, it's like, but how do we recognize the effects of the experiences on ourselves? Responsive is an organizational strategy, trauma-informed organizational strategy. Many of us don't have the the position in our organization to do all this stuff. So remembering what is within our power. Awareness, yes. But a question becomes, am I trauma sensitive? Like me as an individual, right? It can be about all this organizational stuff, but if me as an individual doesn't pivot to consider how I am expressing or not trustworthiness through my kind of interoceptive and neuroceptive expressions, how would it be reasonable that somebody else would believe me when I'm like, oh, no, 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 it's a safe place. No, 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 you can rely on me, right? So a question that we all get to ask is whether or not our nervous systems has the ability to construct safety. It is a courageous question. Sometimes it's hardest to spend time with ourselves. But then it becomes a question about, right, how does my sense of self and my sense of safety is the example that others then look to in terms of what is the appropriate neuroceptive tone in this context. It feels like a lot, a lot, a lot, but it turns out for human beings, we are our own most powerful medicine in restoring integrated nervous system function, not within ourselves and between one another. These are different behavioral practices that can all contribute to constructing neurobiological safety, both in ourselves and in each other. But man, oh man, they can be hard. They can be so hard to talk about collaboration sincerely collaboration requires vulnerability. And in a professional space and even in a home space sometimes, that is hard and it is scary. But it's also necessary if we want to get better, right? And when we want to get better, right? That it turns out for human beings, we are indeed stronger together. It is, in fact, a neurobiological expectation that we would find neurobiological safety in the company of one another. And it happens one synapse at a time. Trauma sensitive as an individual. Can I construct neurobiological safety within myself? How do I have both sympathetic and parasympathetic tone balanced so I express neurobiological safety to others? And over time, then we restore the balance both in ourselves and for the people around us. For resilience to be expressed, the sum of experiences must be able to tolerate stress and carry the synaptic and functional ability to recover autonomic balance. That means this process of repair requires the time, effort, patience, and persistence to actually, right? Like we need new architecture. And we need new architecture, not just in this thinking part of the brain, but like throughout the nervous system. Resilience emerges out of balanced autonomic tone and it's constructed across synapses. We get to rediscover, right? So here's the fun, awesome curiosity that like the most common way people give up our power is thinking they don't have any. But we have the ability for every single one of us to rediscover our own resilience by just being curious about ourselves, right? This idea of trauma sensitivity, we can turn from an organizational perspective to a me perspective. Say, you know, what are the experiences that have constructed me? Right? What are the ways that these experiences now inform the way I live, the way I behave, the way I think about myself, the way I think about others? And through this, by nurturing personal and community well-being, I love neuroscience, right? So my offer would be through the neuroscience of human resilience, right? We can participate collectively in restoring integrated nervous system function. Okay? And this is when communities have the capacity to become self-healing, right? That we will always need medical providers and systems and structures, but we must also take responsibility for ourselves and for each other. We are, in fact, stronger together. So thank you for your time. I will stop my share and any last couple minutes, I can take any questions maybe from the chat.
I haven't seen any questions in the chat, but definitely feel free to put them in there. If you prefer to come off of mute to ask your question as well, that is totally fine.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
While folks are thinking of questions, I'm going to throw the evaluation for this presentation in the chat. Give me just a moment to copy and paste that.
I have a question, and you can just tell me, Nancy, if this is like out of the scope. I was looking at that one of your last slides, the picture of that balance, when you said that a person needs the time and space to like do that top-down healing. Do you think then, like, let's say I'm working with a person who is unhoused and they are my patient, I'm working with them while they're currently facing housing struggles. Like, because they're currently living in such a state of, I guess, I don't know, instability, are they able to do things like building resilience? I mean, obviously we want to treat them the best that we can, but I don't know, what are your thoughts about that? Like, or do we have to fix their levels of instability before we even can consider adding resilience?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is where I want to make it real clear. I need to stay in my lane. I am not a clinician, right? I'm a neuroscientist. So I can give you like a theoretical conceptual framework kind of answer, but like I don't know. I don't do your job. I will never be good at what you do. The way that neurosystems, so I would say, first of all, I would say that anybody that can survive through housing instability is incredibly resilient because they're still like showing up every day and alive. Um, from a balanced function, so like moving, yes, the way that we feel is an expression kind of like of autonomic tone, which is a kind of an expression of nervous system function. Okay. What we do know about brain system function is that the higher the stress dose that we're in, the more we suppress kind of like thinking parts, and the more we rely on emotional and reactive circuitry that to drive behavior. Um, so my opinion would be that it would be like a both and, right? It's like kids don't have behavior like inhibition. They don't have an executive function yet. Well, that doesn't mean that you don't try to work with them until they're 20, right? Like we work with them along the way to help build it. And so that would be, again, my conceptual framework answer is that it would be a both and. Like, yes, if you could solve housing, that'd be great. Be way easier to be like, oh, you get to sleep here every night and over all the meals and all the things. Sure, but if right, like that's not realistic or practical. So like a both and.
That makes sense. Yeah, the way you explained it. We might just have to like temper our expectations about what we can possibly expect from someone who's living in such a state of yeah, that makes
Yes,
sense the way you
I
explained.
think that would be yes. Temper your right, like somebody that doesn't know where they're sleeping and doesn't know if if they fall asleep if it's going to be safe. That individual is not going to have the cognitive and emotional resources that someone like me has because I come home to a house that has food every single day, and that's not in question for me.
Not seeing any questions in the chat, but thank you so much, Nancy, for this great presentation. I know I learned a lot. I'll give it another like 30 seconds in case anyone has any lingering questions. In the meantime, those of you who are not part of the IUOH Primary Care Learning Collaborative, you can leave the call. For those of you that are, Marika and Lindsay just have some closing words for you all. But again, thank you, Nancy. I will follow up with you via email, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure to be here. Have a great day.